Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's ranking all the episodes of Season 3 of Star Trek Next Generation. Continuing on a new tradition that I have, that whenever I finish covering a season of Star Trek, I will then rank all of the episodes in said season from my least favorite to my favorite. So, Season 3 of TNG. So, this is something I talked about a lot before, how amazing this season is, how much better it is than the previous two seasons. I was literally blown away. I don't think I've ever seen any contrast just from one season to another in any show, not even Star Trek Enterprise. Any show going from the massive improvement that it did. Now, I've looked around the net, and it seems like a lot of people don't like Season 3 as much as I do. Maybe it's just me, maybe it's just my personal experience with Season 3, maybe it's because I saw it less than some other people have. I have Patreon supporters who often comment on my videos and give their own ratings between 1 and 10. And quite a few of them have given episodes of Season 3 low ratings, like 2s or 3s. But, yeah, and there's other people on the internet I've seen that said that Season 3 is a very polarizing season. In fact, Michael Piller himself said that he felt that Season 3 was a mix of really bad episodes and a mix of really good episodes, whereas Season 4 is more consistent. Whereas me, personally, I take the other way around. I think that Season 3 is more consistently good. In fact, and this is something I've said before and it actually held true for this recent rewatch of Season 3, I had not given a single negative rating to any episode of Season 3. Now, a negative rating, because I give every episode a rating between 1 and 10, 1 being the worst, 10 being the best, and a negative rating is 1 through 5. And the positive rating is 6 through 7. Now, you're kind of splitting hairs when you get the difference between 5 and 6, because 5 and 6 are very similar. They're both sort of average, okay episodes. It's just 6 is average with the positive 10, and 5 is average with the negative 10. And yeah, I did not give a single episode of Season 3 a negative rating, so the lowest I gave was a 6. And I have done a video before where I ranked all of the seasons of the entire Star Trek franchise, and I think I did that video like 3 years ago, and I put Star Trek The Next Generation Season 3 as number 1. It's my favorite season of the entire franchise. Now, I don't know if that will still hold, but it's got a good shot because I was super impressed with this season. Now, contrast that to Season 1 and 2, which if you haven't seen my videos on this season, I was a lot more negative on Season 2 than a lot of people were. And so I thought that the first two seasons were very not good. So Season 1, I gave, out of 25 episodes, I gave 10 a positive rating and 15 a negative rating. So that's 3/5 of the episodes I gave negative ratings. So that's more than half. Season 2, it was exactly half of the episodes that I gave a negative rating to. So half negative, half positive. Contrast that to Season 3, 0 negative. That is a huge difference. Now, the other thing I did when I covered Seasons 1 and 2 is that I averaged out. I took all the ratings that I made and averaged them out. And that don't necessarily give a very clear picture of what I thought of the season overall, because there's more than just ratings and averaging them out. It's more complex than that. But I'm going to continue that tradition of averaging out the ratings to see what's rates higher. Now, obviously, Season 3 is the highest. That's obvious. But so Season 1 averaged out 4.76. So that's the average rating I gave an episode in season 1. Season 2 averaged out as 4.86. So almost the same. Only a very, very slight variation between those two seasons. Season 3, the average is 7.8. So that is a massive improvement. And I don't know. We'll see. We'll see going forward if another season, even though I called season 3 my favorite season, maybe another season is going to break that record and get a higher average, which is possible, because the thing is, there's other seasons that I do give more negative ratings to. I have some 1s and 2s, but more 10s and 9s. So it's possible one of those seasons could get a better average overall. But that wouldn't change the fact that this is the only season I give no negative rating to. In fact, I almost at one point referred to this as the season of the 7, because most of the episodes in the season I give a 7 out of 10 to. But looking at my final results, that's not actually true. So let's see. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 episodes I give a 7 out of 10. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 episodes I give an 8 out of 10. So yeah, 7 is higher than 8, but only by 2 episodes. So yeah, I could call it the season of a 7, but it does also have a lot of 8s as well. So that is where most of these episodes, the majority of the episodes, will get a rating between either 7 or 8. So there's something unique about season 3 that I didn't have to deal with when I covered seasons 1 and 2. And that is that it has a 2-part cliffhanger where part 1 is at the end of season 3 and part 2 is at the start of season 4. Now, typically what I do on my channel, I cover 2-parters as if they're one episode, because that makes more sense to me. I think splitting them up doesn't really make any sense, because they don't. You're cutting it off between one doesn't have an ending and the other doesn't have a beginning. And when it's now different when it's a serialized storyline, you have several episodes like 8 or 10. But when there's just 2 of them and they're clearly make one standalone story, to me it makes the most sense to cover the 2-parters as one episode. However, as far as my ranking all the episodes of a particular season, this creates a problem, because you have one entry that consists of 2 episodes, one from one season, one from the other. So I was trying to decide how to handle this. So I had the options where I could, in fact, go against my tradition of covering 2-parters as one and split them up, cover part 1 in season 3 and part 2 in season 4. Or I could cover both parts in the same season that part 1 was in, or I can cover both parts in the same season that part 2 was in. Or what I did decide to do at one point was to play it by ear. So for each 2-parter, I would decide some of them maybe I'd split the episodes up, some of them maybe I'd cover with part 1, some of them maybe I'd cover with part 2. However, as I started to go through the season to the episodes in question and the seasons, I realized that the majority of them I would then qualify as covering both parts in the same season that part 1 is in. So I decided to make that my norm. So when there is a 2-parter that is split between 2 seasons, I will cover them both parts, as if they're one episode, but in the same season that part 1 is in. For example, with the Best of Both Worlds, that will be covered both parts. Best of Both Worlds parts 1 and 2 will be covered in season 3. And with Redemption, both parts of Redemption parts 1 and 2 will be covered in season 5. Times Arrows parts 1 and 2 will be covered. Sorry, I said season 5. I meant season 4. Redemption will be season 4, just to be clear. And Times Arrow will be season 5. Descent will be season 6. And when you get over the Voyager, you got Basics. That will be season 2. Scorpion will be season 3. What comes after Scorpion? Equinox, that will be season 5. Unimatrix Zero will be season 6. So, and for Enterprise, Shockwave will be season 1. So I think those are all the two-parters, though, that are split between season. When it comes to DS9, I will split them apart because they're not true two-parters. They're not part 1 and 2. Even though I did an episode for Tear of the Prophets and Shadows and Symbols and the other one in that trilogy, but really Tears of the Prophets is his own episode, even though it's a cliffhanger that leads into the other two. The other two are clearly a two-parter, but the season 6 one is not. That's different. So DS9 is going to be split for everyone, but those episodes of Next Gen, Voyager, and Enterprise that I named are clearly two-parters, so will be counted as one episode and will be included in the season that season 1 is in, or that part 1 is in. So that's what I will be doing from now on. So anyway, I'm going to start my list of 26 episodes. I'm going to start each time I get to a different rating. Card will flash on the screen. We'll say the rating I'm about to cover, and all the episodes I cover will be of that rating until the card flashes again for the next rating. So cool. Let's go ahead and get started. So, coming in at number 26 of the season, and thus my least favorite episode of the season, Menage a Troi. Now, the caveat should be getting that if this episode was in season 1 or season 2, this would instantly be in my top 10. And now, season 2, it could possibly be number 11. So, top 11, let's say. But, yeah, it's number 26 because this is season 3. Anyway, Menage a Troi, I did discover that it was my least favorite episode of the season. It was the episode that was closest to getting a negative rating. It was very, very close, in fact, to getting a 5. It was on the edge. It only barely makes it to a 6 because of Picard's reciting Shakespeare poetry at the end, which I thought was absolutely hilarious. It has me bawling, laughing every time I see that, and the whole interaction with Luoxana. Plus, I gotta give this episode credit for using Luoxana in a way that's not that bad, especially since this is coming from the season 2 episode Manhunt, where they absolutely mishandled Luoxana, and that is one of the worst episodes of the entire franchise, let alone the Next Generation show. So they recovered from that nicely with this okay average episode of the Ferengis abducting her and trying to steal her telepathic powers, which was okay. So, sticking to the theme of Betazoids, we'll get to my number 25. So, second least favorite episode of season 3, and that is The Price. No price. Anyway, The Price. Yeah, I didn't really like Deanna Troi's romance with Devanali Ram. He was too much of a sleazebag for my tastes. And the storyline with the Ferengi trying to buy a wormhole was a bit goofy, but there was definitely a lot of good things about this episode to keep it away from the negative rating. The introduced concept of quadrants, Delta Quadrant, Gamma Quadrant. You first hear about it in this episode. A wormhole to the Gamma Quadrant. They do a whole show about that later on. And also the episode itself, even though I hate Devanali Ram and I thought that he was a stupid, sleazy character, some of the scenes with him are done really well, particularly when he is trying to outmaneuver Riker, but Riker smacks him down hard when he's trying to be like, "Oh, Deanna, you lost her, now she's mine," and he just smiled and be like, "That's the first mistake I've seen you make." Great moment. And also there's some nice Ferengi moments, particularly the joke about the chairs. Then who brings the chairs? Fine, have your Klingon servant bring us some chairs. That was funny. So that gets a 6 out of 10 as well. So next We'll move over to my number 24, which is Booby Trap. I guess I do like this episode less than a lot of other people. I just don't see the point of Geordi going to the holodeck and recreating Leah Brahms, and why the computer created this hologram to be really creepy and like touch him, and it's the likeness of like a real person. What's wrong with the computer? I think the computer needs an overhaul. And why is Geordi spending his time in the holodeck when he should be working with his engineering team? And the thing that irritates me the most about this episode is the fact that they had Picard be the one to navigate the Enterprise to safety, which he was the least qualified person to do so. I would have thought it was hilarious that the ship would have exploded and everyone would have died because Picard was being too egotistical to let someone more qualified fly the fucking ship. But other than that, it was actually a pretty interesting episode. With it was intense with them being stuck in this booby trap, and everything they try to do to get out of it makes things worse. And as much as I didn't like the Geordi-Leah relationship, some scenes were actually interesting, like when they were arguing with each other, and the fact that they came up with this moral dilemma as, do we let the computer, do we turn over all control to the computer, or do we take all control away from the computer and rely on the human element? Interesting concept, and this brings about Picard's love of archaeology. So it was definitely avoided that negative rating. It was definitely interesting enough to do that, but not interesting enough to get any higher than a 6. Moving on to my 7 rated episodes, and as I said, we will be here for a while. So we'll start with my number 23, which is Captain's Holiday. It was a fun, goofy episode about Picard going on vacation to a pleasure planet, and it was a bit goofy with the Ferengi and going off on this Indiana Jones or Romancing the Stone type adventure. But unlike a lot of people, I actually thought Picard had some chemistry with Vash. I thought their relationship was actually really interesting. There were some interesting moments between these two characters, such as the whole joke about the Horgon. And, the main plot line with the aliens from the future was kind of throwaway, but then also a little interesting as well. And I love the main reason why this episode gets a 7 rather than a 6 is because I love the chemistry, the character stories between the main characters at the start of the episode when they're trying to pressure Picard to leave the ship. I think that the crew really comes off as a family, and I think there's some really funny jokes within that, such as them Counselor Troy saying, "Oh, my mother is coming on board," to try to scare Picard to actually leave the ship. So there were some nice moments in there and some nice moments with Vosh. So that is my number 23. So next we'll move over to my number 22, which is Evolution. This episode, I did like it better on this rewatch because, again, the character stories, I like the chemistry between Beverly and Wesley, because this is Beverly's return after her year-long absence from season 2, and they actually touch on that, and actually touch on the strain between her relationship with her son because of that. And we actually a really interesting plot about these nanites that become sentient, and this stupid scientist who gets pissed off and tries to kill them, and they try to retaliate, but with Data's help they manage to broker a peace with Picard. And so that's all interesting. However, I don't like the fact that Wesley is this super genius who creates an entire sentient species, like entire civilization. He creates it as a science project. Come on, stop it with the Mary Sue bullshit with Wesley. But other than that, thought this was a pretty solid episode. So next we'll move over to my number 21, which is Hollow Pursuits. Now this is another episode I thought I wouldn't like all that much, because I'm not a huge fan of Barclay, and I think the episode has some weird rules with privacy involving the holodeck? How come anyone can just wander in your holodeck program while you're doing this weird shit? Like, is that ethical? And is it okay, like, for the computer to allow Barkley to make a hologram of one of his coworkers and make out with her on a regular basis? There's something about that also seems questionable. But what really attracted me to this episode is the fact that Picard saw someone on his crew that was suffering, and instead of following his first officer and his chief engineer's advice and simply transferring him to another ship, he actually took it upon himself to reach out to the person and make him feel better. And Geordi was ordered to become good friends with him, which he was very upset about. However, once he did get to know Barkley, he realized that he was a good person, and they did become good friends. And Geordi changing his tact from constantly yelling at him to supporting him and being a helpful hand really helped Barkley a lot, and I love that message. I love how it was portrayed. I think that was pretty good. It does have some goofy holodeck programs with the Three Musketeers, which I wasn't a fan of, but I love the character stories, and I love how Geordi and Barkley work together to solve the mystery of the week, or the dilemma, or whatever. So it was a decent episode. So next we'll go over to my number 20, which is The Most Toys. Now, this episode I have previously rated as an 8, so it did drop a rating because I just don't like the main storyline of everyone thinking Data's dead, where it's freaking obvious that he's not dead. Like, the audience knows that he's not dead, so it feels like kind of a waste of time of everyone going through his things, lamenting about how he's dead, and they promote Worf to Ops, which, why would they do that? That makes zero sense. And that whole storyline I think was a wash. And even the main storyline with the Collector collecting Data and trying to force him to sit still for his Collector friends, I don't know, seems kind of not much there, and kind of like stereotypical concept idea. But what saves this episode easily is the performance by Saul Rubinek, who plays the Collector Kivas Fajo, and my God, his performance is so goddamn good. It prevents us from me giving this episode a 5 or 6. Has to be a 7 just on his performance alone and his interaction with Data. And you do have some tense moments with Data trying to escape, and Kivas Fajo killing his own minion in order to punish Data. It was brutal stuff. And the ending was great, where Data kind of rubbed it in his face and was like, I do not feel pleasure. I am only an android. That was a pretty badass moment. So yeah, so that episode gets a 7. So next we will get to my number 19, which is The Bonding. Now this is another episode that actually went up for me. Previously, I actually did give this a negative rating a few years back, and it went a bit up to like a 5 to a 6, I believe, but this time it went even further up to a 7, because what I hate about this episode is that it has no continuity either forward or backwards. It introduces two characters we've never seen of or heard of before and kills one of them off in the first 2 seconds of the episode. And then it has the surviving boy being an honorary brother with Worf, and then we never see or hear from this boy again. So what is the goddamn point of the episode? But when I look past that, I actually see a really powerful character story about dealing with death and dealing with remorse, and how it was actually a very interesting thought experiment where an alien pretends to be his mother, and how that prevents him from healing, and Picard and Troy have to convince the alien that no, he needs to face the death of his mother in order to move on. And that was actually powerful, and I think those character moments were written well, and Patrick Stewart performed his part very well, and I'm just so impressed with how much better the writing is for Picard and for everyone in Season 3. It's just such a huge improvement from Season 2. Anyway, we'll now move over to my number 18, 14, which is Who Watches the Watchers. This is a very interesting Prime Directive episode that deals with why the Prime Directive exists and what happens when they kind of fuck it up and accidentally break it, where this group of aliens see these futuristic Federation technology and they think it's magic, and it inspires them to create a false religion that is Picard's fault, and they make Picard the god. Now Picard knows that he's not a god, and it's not, and the religion would not exist if the Federation didn't fuck up and interfere. So it's Picard's job to prevent that from happening, and so the best way he can do it is just break the Prime Directive some more and reveal himself to the aliens to be like, look, I exist, but I'm just a person, just like you. No magical powers, I'm not a god. And he almost sacrifices his own life in order to prove that point. And so that was pretty powerful. So next we will get into my number 17, which is the Ensigns of Command. It had a very stellar B-plot about Picard doing negotiations with this race called the Shellyak that thinks humanoid beings are inferior and just ants and barely wants to talk to them. They in fact want to kill an entire colony of humans because they don't give a shit, and Picard tries to negotiate to let them live, and he is faced with obstacle after obstacle until he finally comes up with a loophole in the treaty and is able to beat the Shellyak over the head with it in a very amusing, very satisfying way, which I love. Now the A plot, I should say, with Data on the planet, I also like, but not as much, because this one has a bit more flaws for me. It has a romance that is not really a romance, and I think it should have been. In fact, I read the original script for it, and I did like it a lot better. That actually did have Data and this woman hook up, and I think it made a lot more sense, and the character was more fleshed out than she was in this version. And the character of Goshaven, who refuses to leave the planet, who is very stubborn and idiotic, while not unrealistic, is very frustrating to watch. So it makes that storyline hard to watch. And really, I think Data should have just led with, the Shell are gonna wipe you out from orbit, and there's nothing you can do about it. And he waited till the end of the episode to reveal this very crucial information, why, so the episode could happen. But that being said, it was still interesting seeing Data having to cope and deal with human beings on their level, and so that didn't entirely hate this storyline. I thought it was good as well. So next we will get into my number 16, The High Ground, of which I think I might like this episode better than most, which is an episode about terrorism, and it's definitely, obviously, making an analogy to the terrorism that was going on in Ireland during the time this episode was being made. And mainly I like this episode because of the acting. I think Gates McFadden, who I'm usually actually not a fan of her acting, I think does a really good job in this episode, and so does the guest actor who plays the terrorist Finn. I think the chemistry they have was very interesting. I think the moral debates they had was very interesting, and I think the chemistry between them really worked. It was exciting with Picard and Wesley trying to, find Beverly and save her, and the stakes where the Enterprise almost got blown up. That was really, really good. But this episode only gets a 7 and not higher because they kind of lazily did an Irish terrorism analogy without developing these aliens further. They didn't really explain exactly why the terrorists were being terrorists. They didn't exactly explain what the main government was doing to repress the people. They didn't exactly explain the whole situation. It was kind of just a lazy analogy, but some good character moments. Anyway, we'll now move over to my number 15, which is Sarek, which I do believe I probably have lower than most people would. I do think this episode is a tad bit overrated, but it's still really good. I still really like Sarah, even though I think a lot of people overrate it because it's an original series character and but it's also a good episode. It has some good character stories, particularly the analogy they make with Alzheimer's and how it feels to have someone that you look up to who is this inspiring, how heartbreaking it is to see them fall apart and lose their mind due to old age. And this is something that Picard and the crew must deal with, while at the same time his condition makes various people at random along the ship start yelling at each other, which is a somewhat interesting concept episode. And the scenes with when Picard confronts Sarek is very powerful. And very well done. However, I think the ending is they used a mind meld in a weird way, and that's never been used before, which always makes me really iffy about. And plus, the ending just seems to end abruptly without a very satisfying conclusion. So that's why I don't hold this episode in that high of esteem. But as I said, still great character story, still a great, powerful analogy to Alzheimer's. So it's a good episode in that regard. Alright, so next we move over to my number 14, which is A Matter of Perspective. And yeah, I think I do like this episode more than most people do. I actually thought it was a really good falsely accused trial episode, and that is a very specific kind of episode, but there's a lot of them where a main cast member is falsely accused of murder and put on trial for the crime of murder when you know they actually didn't do it. There is quite a few episodes like that, and most of them aren't any good, and so this one is easily my favorite out of those. Because it, as the episode title suggests, it does deal with eyewitness testimony that is entirely different. However, no one is lying. They just remember things differently, which I think is a very interesting concept. And I like the way the mystery is unraveled as Picard slowly figures everything out in a badass manner and presents it with the help of Geordi and Data, revealing that it was, in fact, the victim tried to kill Riker and accidentally killed himself, which I thought was I love the contrasts between all the different testimonies as well, because you can kind of figure out that the truth lies somewhere in the middle. Anyway, we'll then get to my number 13, which is Tin Man. I think another episode I favor a bit more than most people. Yeah, Tin Man I thought was a really good character story of the Betazoid who has telepathic powers, is too powerful, and it's difficult for him to deal with everyone's emotions and feelings flooding his brain all of a sudden. And he's an expert. He's considered an expert by the Federation because he's so powerful, but he has a bit of mental issues because of this. And I think that is a very interesting contrast, and I think that the actor who portrays him does an amazing job at this, and I think the bonds that he forms with Data is really interesting, and it adds into the Enterprise having a chase with the Romulans to try to get to the sentient spaceship first is a very exciting, and I think the ending resolution where he decides to stay behind and be at one with the ship, and then the Data and Troy have a nice bonding moment at the end was really powerful, really emotional. So I always thought this was a pretty good episode. So next we'll get into my number 12, which is Sins of the Father. Perhaps I might have this a bit lower than most people because honestly, I think the beginning of the episode was a bit mishandled, that they shouldn't have done a whole storyline with Kern being an exchange officer and Wesley being upset because he's being too mean, and Geordi complaining that the Klingons being too mean and pushing them too hard, because that storyline is then quickly abandoned for the fact that he actually turns out to be Worf's brother, and he's there to test Worf to see if he's a true Klingon so he can go back and defend their father, who is being falsely accused of crimes that he did not commit, namely being a Romulan collaborator. And through the trial and Kern almost being killed and Picard taking his place, we discovered that Worf's father is in fact innocent, and that it is a governmental plot. Because the person who was actually guilty, his family is too powerful, and so they want to pin it on Worf's father instead. So Worf agrees to take the blame for the crime, even though he knows his father is innocent, for the betterment, for the good of the Empire, and accepts discommendation from the Empire. So that was very powerful, and it was very interesting political statements, and a very intriguing mystery. But I do think, that beginning, they shouldn't have bothered with it. Anyway, we will then get into my number 11, which is The Enemy. Now, this episode definitely went up in ratings. I actually used, for some reason, a couple years ago and watched this. I really didn't like this episode, but this time I watched it, I really did like it. So, it is, the main plot is kind of a ripoff of Alien Mind, or Alien Mine, I think it is, where Geordi and a Romulan at first are at each other's throat and trying to kill each other. At least the Romulans constantly trying to kill Geordi, or at least hold him hostage. But then they end up working together in order to get rescued when they're on this very dangerous planet. Meanwhile, there's a Romulan on the ship that needs a blood transfusion from Worf in order to survive, and Worf refuses to give it, which I think was a very interesting, very powerful story, and I think the way it was played, the way it was acted, was done extremely well. And then you have Picard dealing with Tomalak. The introduction of Tomalak and the chemistry between them is amazing, where Tomalak is willing to start a war, and Picard has to play things just right. And of course, Geordi's friendship with the Romulan does help them cool the situation in the end. So I've come to appreciate this episode a lot more, actually. So next, we will get into my number 10, coming to my top 10 finally. And my number 10 is Allegiance. And they give us food that Isa can't eat, where Picard is held captive for reasons unknown by people unknown, and they're trying to figure out why they're being held hostage and who is holding them hostage and how do they escape. And Picard, of course, using his badass intellect, is able to finally figure out that one of the people with them is an imposter who is holding them captive. And it's all part of an experiment by aliens who have no hierarchy or sense of hierarchy. So they capture people who have come from different societies that handle hierarchy differently and study it. And meanwhile, there's an imposter of Picard that is on the ship, wreaking havoc, singing, drinking songs, and eventually deciding to try to destroy the whole ship for no good reason until Riker finally relieves him of command. And I just love this episode. I think it's very well done and interesting, but not like one of the best things ever, but entertaining, definitely. So next we will get into my number 9, which is Deja Q. One of the better Q episodes, and I think honestly the first good Q episode, the first time the show used Q well, because they decided to make him a bit more comedic, and I think this episode is very funny, very fun as well, as it deals with Q being turned into a mortal and had the hijinks that ensue because of that. But there's also heart in this episode, as he forms a bond with Data, who actually risks his own life to try to protect Q. And once Q Q gives his powers back. He puts on a hilarious display with, musical instruments and whatnot, but also gives Data the gift of laughter, which was a very heartwarming, very touching moment. But Q comes back to warn Picard not to count on that he's actually a good person. So, next we'll get into my number 8, which is The Hunted. Actually a surprisingly powerful episode. I probably like this episode too more than most people. Deals with the issue of how veterans are mistreated by their governments. They're used to fight wars but then quickly abandoned. In this particular episode, it's veterans who were genetically engineered to be the best killers ever but are unable to integrate into society because of what the government did to them. Instead of helping them, the government decides to put them on a penal colony, and they break out and outwit the Enterprise crew to try to revolt, and Picard and Troy eventually make it clear that the government needs to handle their own shit and refuse to help them until they actually start to help the people that they've abandoned. Pretty powerful episode. So now, up to my 9 rated episodes, and now I'm at the portion of the countdown where everyone and their mother will disagree with my rankings and think that these episodes are rated too highly, because these next 2 episodes I've heard a lot of people put at the bottom of their list of Season 3, but here they are, all the way towards the top. So, next we'll get to my number 7, which is Transfigurations. I know it's an episode I recently found out a lot of people don't like, which I never realized. I always liked this episode as a teenager. I kind of am a sucker for the sort of new age message of the episode of beings ascending into an energy being, and more than that, I just love the chemistry between the guest star John Doe and Beverly. They have a little romance that's not too much of an on-the-top romance, though they do address the fact that Beverly definitely has strong feelings towards John, and I think that comes off in a very lovely way, where the two of them have nice chemistry, and they have a good side plot where Geordi finds his confidence and actually gets the girl that he couldn't get in Booby Trap, and I only wish that they brought this character back so that Geordi could have a long-standing relationship between them. That would have been a much better turn for this character, and my only regret is that they didn't continue this storyline, where that also had some very funny lines from Worf saying, "I've been tutoring him," which is great parts of the episode. But the ending where we find out that the aliens are trying to kill John and those like him who are trying to ascend into a higher being, or these energy beings, and that Picard is willing to stick up for them, and John does ascend, and he's able to help the Enterprise crew from dying and make the evil aliens go away, and thanks the Enterprise crew for actually saying that it wouldn't be possible without their love and kindness, which I thought was very heartwarming. So I thought it was a very powerful, feel-good ending. So next we'll get to my number 6, which is The Vengeance Factor. This has always been a really personal favorite of mine, so a lot of it does probably have to do with personal nostalgia. But I always did love a storyline about the Gatherers. I thought it was excellent world building that really is very fascinating, and seeing Picard negotiate with the Gatherers and their original species, the Acamarians, and trying to bring them back into society, which I thought was very well done. But on top of that, I mainly love the romance between Riker and Yuta, which I think worked extremely well, much better than most romance of the week, because you could see that Riker actually cared about this character, and I think both actors did an amazing job of playing that. And then you have the tragic ending where Riker is forced to kill her in order to save the Gatherer's life, because she turns out to be this huge assassin who was genetically engineered for the purpose of killing people. Now, yes, the ending was a bit contrived. And Riker, did he really have to kill her? Not really, but I usually hand wave that away as bad writing, but the rest of the episode's really good, so I don't let it bother me too much. Because I thought it was a very tragic love story, and the tragic love stories is what really, really gets to me. So next we'll go from 2 episodes that people will be upset that I have too high to an episode that people will be upset that I have too low, and that is my number 5, The Best of Both Worlds. Now, it is my number 5, 5th favorite. Now, being 5 out of the season is a high number. It's a high accomplishment. But I know that's not going to be good enough for a lot of people who think this should be my number 1 or my number 2, because it would be for most other people. But hey, being honest with myself, not going by what other people think, going by what I think. And I think that this episode is slightly overrated. Although I do think it is, as I said, it's number 5 on my list, so I must like it quite a bit, which I do. Because I think it is a powerful, suspenseful episode that has amazing music, by the way, where Picard is held captive or taken captive by the Borg and turned into a Borg, and the Borg threatened to wipe out all civilization, to wipe out all the Federation. They seem unstoppable. So it's super suspenseful. Also, pretty great character story for Riker, how he has to deal with at first turning down his chance to be captain, and then when Picard is abducted, becoming the captain of the Enterprise and learning to operate in that role. And I think he does a very good job. Is pretty suspenseful. I don't have this as my number 1 or number 2 because I think action suspense is not what TNG does best. And also, the storyline with Shelby, I think, was unnecessary and could have been cut out entirely. Just my humble opinion. But other than that, really strong episode where, Data saves the day through using his lab to connect with Locutus of Borg in order to get the Borg to fall asleep and then blow themselves up. Pretty powerful stuff, pretty suspenseful. Definitely one of the most intense episodes of the entire show. So next, we'll get into my number 4, which is The Defector. Always a really powerful episode, in my opinion, about a Romulan who is forced to defect to the Federation because he believes that the Romulans are trying to start a war with the Federation, which he realizes would be very bad for the Romulan Empire. So he does it to save Romulus, and at first refuses to give the Enterprise crew any intel other than what they need to stop the war, but that makes Picard and the rest of the Starfleet crew question his loyalties, particularly when they find out that he is this renowned Romulan admiral guilty of carrying out massacres against Federation citizens. So he eventually does what he needs to do and gives the Enterprise crew all the information that they request. But when the Enterprise goes into the neutral zone to stop this secret Romulan base, they find that it was a trap, that it never existed, that the Romulans were simply testing the defector to test his loyalty, and thus he sacrificed his whole life, his whole family, for nothing. And what a tragic ending. And of course he does end up committing suicide, and it was very powerful, very tragic, very sad, and the music for this one was pretty amazing as well. So finally, we get to my top 3, my 10 rated episodes, which the previous two seasons, season 1 and 2, had no 10 rated episodes. There was only one episode in season 2 rated a 9. All the other episodes of both seasons were an 8 or lower. So now we're getting into episodes I think that were way better than anything in seasons 1 and 2. So best of the best for me, we'll get into my number 3, which is The Survivors. I thought this was probably the best mystery that The Next Generation ever did. It was very well done, very fascinating, very intriguing mystery of them discovering two survivors on a planet where the entire colony was killed, where everyone else was dead save for two old people, and there's no way to explain this. And as they're trying to solve this mystery, Troy starts experiencing this horrible situation where she hears the same song playing in her head with perfect clarity from start to finish, repeatedly without any stopping. That sounds fucking horrific, and Marina Sirtis does an amazing job playing how horrific this is. And meanwhile, a ship shows up to start attacking him, and the ship is behaving kind of strangely, being very powerful at some points and being kind of easy to avoid at other points, until Picard finally gets a theory, tests his theory, and figures out that the ship is responding to Kevin and Rashawn's wishes. And then he further figures out the mystery that Kevin Offspring is in fact an omniscient alien being with great powers, and that he is recreating his wife who actually died during the attack. After making this discovery, Kevin takes the music away from Troy to save her and confesses to having killed an entire species of those that attacked his colony. All women and children and men everywhere in the universe, killed them all instantly with a thought. So he's obviously feeling great guilt over that, but Picard says he's not qualified to be his to hold him account for that there's no crimes, that it has no laws to fit his crime, and thus lets him go. And it was a very ominous, very powerful, very rewarding ending. So next we'll get into my number 2, which is yesterday's Enterprise. One of the best episodes of the entire show that a lot of people would agree with me on, thankfully, finally on this one. Although they probably would have this at number 1 and not what I have at number 1, but that's all good. Amazing story of an alternate timeline where a ship from the past comes to the present and creates an alternate timeline where the Klingons and the Starfleet are at war, and Starfleet is losing that war, and thus we have Tasha Yar back on the ship rather than Worf. And Tasha Yar goes through her own personal character story when she realizes that she died in the real timeline that they're trying to restore, and she died. Her death had no purpose and no meaning, and she didn't like the sound of that, so she's willing to go back in time with the Enterprise C to sacrifice herself to make sure that they correct the timeline. And then the Enterprise also sacrifices itself to make sure the Enterprise C goes back in time. We see Riker die and Picard go down in flames, firing phasers. Amazing, very exciting, powerful episode. So next, we will come to my number 1 favorite episode of Season 3, and that is The Offspring. To me, this is the episode I would hold in higher esteem than The Measure of a Man. And I compare it a lot to The Measure of Man because that episode gets too high accolades, in my opinion, because it has too many faults. It has too many Season 2 isms, if you know what I mean. Whereas this episode does something similar. It's not the same thing, though. It's not a ripoff, but it does something similar, but I think it does it better. It explores Data's rights and the rights of androids and how sentient they are, but it does it through the storyline of having a daughter. And what I love about this episode is that it doesn't have a threat of the week. I mean, you could consider the Admiral coming on board As a threat, he certainly is, but it's not the typical threat. It's not a useless threat. It's not an alien species firing phasers at the Enterprise for no good reason. It's an admiral who I actually think, as some people complain, is mustache twirly, but I think that's ridiculous compared to A Measure of the Man, where Maddox is way more mustache twirly. He actually makes sense because he does have the good intentions. He does want what's best for the android. He just has a different perspective on how to go about it, and his perspective does not respect Data's rights. Does not respect Data's rights as a parent, and Picard is willing to risk his career to stand up for Data's rights, and this was one of the most powerful moments in the entire show. It was one of the best Picard speeches in the entire show. It was so good, but on top of that, you had this amazing character story with Data becoming a father and teaching his daughter how to live, and you have some really great, powerful character moments between them as she doesn't understand while kids are laughing at her and Data tries to explain it, and she eventually holds his hand, but then it ends in tragedy as her program degrades and she starts to die, but she feels the emotion, and you have one of the most tear-jerky moments of the entire franchise where she thanks Data for her life and says that she loves him, and he regretfully says that he's not able to love her back, but she says that she will feel it for the both of them, and then dies. I can't think of a more tear-jerky, emotionally powerful moment in any movie or show at the moment. I'm sure there's some that I would put on par with this, but this is easily one of the best. So that is my number one pick for Season 3 of Star Trek The Next Generation. So that is it for my ranking all the episodes of Season 3 of Star Trek The Next Generation. So please check out my channel as I continue to cover Star Trek The Next Generation. I'm taking a little break after covering Season 3 to I put out some Star Trek polls, doing one episode from each of the 5 series, which I will release a video for one at a time, doing the original series, Next Gen, DS9, Voyager, and Enterprise, and then I will, after I do those, we'll go back to covering Star Trek Next Generation, starting with Season 4. So please be sure to check out my channel for that, and many more Star Trek videos, and many more videos, and many other shows as well. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.